Welcome back to Common Criminal Podcast. Just kidding. This is Vince versus everyone. Common Criminal Podcast hasn't existed in almost a decade now. It is really cool, the number of people going back through the old YouTube archive to check out some of those interviews. It's kind of weird. I got a blast from the past. Somebody commented on a conversation I had with a friend of mine like forever ago. And so it was just funny, like seeing them comment on that and thinking how different I am, how different that friend is now. And, you know, it was really cool. It was a cool experience. So you can check all that out. That's all on the YouTube page. It's Vince versus everyone, but the old Common Criminal Podcast still exists there. But I went a little quiet over the weekend. You know, we had a big story on Friday, and a ton of people liked and shared. Thank you, everyone who helped get that story out. You can still find it on my channels. It's the one that has way more views than everything else. It's like, I think, the 5th or 6th one down now. But it's just a 2-minute video outlining this whole scandal with L Louise Lucas and her Medicaid empire sitting at the middle of it. But no, $52.7 million of taxpayer money. That's where we kick it off. It was pretty crazy. I mean, this woman, she's insulated herself from, you know, on the money side, she's made sure that those dollars keep flowing. And then on the actual accountability side, she's chairing up the HBCDBA. I think I got that acronym right. So she basically can't be investigated, even though there's been 9 deaths and, you know, tons and tons of people getting hurt there. I think it was 141 serious injuries and 121 repeated violations. I mean, it's pretty crazy. Somebody did point out I was incorrect. It's not just old folks. It's not just 70 and 80-year-olds that live in these facilities. It's 70 or 80-year-olds that have an IQ below 70, which actually makes it way worse. Like, way worse. Absolutely disgusting. This woman, honestly, I can't even describe it. But anyway, at the end of this video, we'll get a little bit more into that because there are a couple updates, a couple things I wanted to add over the weekend. A lot of people commenting that brought even more things to light. But another story that came out over this weekend, I had a couple people reach out and ask why I wasn't covering the New York Times article about the Democrat plan to pack the courts in Virginia. Basically, long story short, they're talking about lowering the retirement age for judges so that way they can just completely restaff all the seats in the court. So the Virginia Senate Majority Leader, he came out, he said that he doesn't support that option. They're not going to do a vote. That's not something he's interested in supporting. Hey, Hams, I see you here, man. I see you here. What's going on? What's going on, man? But no, so he's not supportive of that option. Immediately afterward, we had Abigail Spanberger come out. Once she knows that there's no way to do this plan, she comes out and says also she would no longer support it. Incredibly stunning and brave of her that after the plan is already dead on arrival, she says that she wouldn't support it. And that's exactly right. They were just trying to test the waters. And, you know, at this time, the real plan is that Virginia Democrats, they filed to the Supreme Court of the U.S. That was always the real plan. That Chief Justice John Roberts, he says that he expects that the Republicans will have their rebuttal, their counter will be submitted by Thursday. So maybe we'll get a little more news on that this week. That'd be great. You know, Thursday, Friday, going into the weekend, we find out. It'd be hilarious to get another, Clarence Thomas or John Roberts writing some kind of dissent, like dismissing it out of hand. You know, sometimes they're fun, but there are other possibilities. You know, that case hinged on a definition for elections that it runs technically contrary to the federal definition. That is true. In the federal government, they say early voting is just a provision. But election day is still just a day because that's the day that the votes are counted. Where the Virginia Supreme Court, after hearing arguments, they said, well, the early voting did disenfranchise all of these people. So they defined the election as something that starts with early voting. So there is a possibility that the Supreme Court of the United States actually does take on this case so they can examine, does early voting count as an election? And that's a possibility. I think it's a long shot. You know, they don't really weigh in on state elections like ever, so I find that highly unlikely. But, you know, it'd be interesting. It would definitely be newsworthy. It would definitely be newsworthy. But it's worth noting that the online crowd, was very in favor of this plan. Like the online left, I mean, like they really loved that they was getting appealed, or they loved the idea of even lowering the voting age. You saw Ted Lieu, he's like a congressman, and he's saying, "Oh yeah, just do it. The Republicans would do it. Just do it." And I just got to point out, like, these are fundamentally unserious people with no self-awareness at all. Like, honestly, like, it was like a year ago. It was like, oh my God, they're arresting judges. They're arresting judges. That's the part of fascism we've entered. And it's like, dude, like, I can't tell. Like, are you stupid, or do you just think that everybody that's listening to you is stupid? Because either way, like, this is not a good look. Yeah, exactly. Like, exactly. Like Lincoln did this. This has happened before. Like, we've seen this, and with enough turmoil, we have people where we have presidents that have to do crazy things. Lincoln, he was like jailing even the Adams administration. I point this out. The John Adams administration jailed the nephew of Benjamin Franklin. Did you know that? They jailed him because he was leading a campaign to try and return to the crown. And so it was the second president. Like, George Washington was still alive. He had barely hung it up. And it was like the first, I want to say it was like, it wasn't even like during the Adams administration. It was like off rip. He's like, I'm president now. He hasn't even gotten the furniture moved into the White House yet. And he's like, yeah, and by the way, arrest that guy. Like, so yeah, this happens. This happens in America. But regardless, the reason I never made a video about that until today, I did finally address it. That this was never really a serious plan. Like, nobody on the record ever even confirmed the New York Times phone call. Like, the New York Times runs some article. They say, "Oh, we have details about a secret phone call." Where have I heard that before? Like, and it's crazy because Trump supporters, they clock this all the time. When it has anything to do with Trump, they're immediately like, oh, who's the source? Oh, it's some homeless guy outside the White House. And yet you had so many Republicans, like so many prominent pundits that were taking the bait. And it's like, dude, what are we even doing? Because that goes back to the same question. Are you stupid, or do you just think everybody who listens is stupid? I cannot tell. I really can't tell. But regardless, I honestly, the reality is I think they are just trying to ratchet up the temperature. I think that that's what it really comes down to. They want to see if how their base would react. And they want to see, more importantly, they want to see online Republicans reacting. They want to have these nasty voicemails left for the Virginia Congress people. They want to have these nasty Twitter messages floating around, because then come midterms, they're going to say, oh, well, look what the Republicans said. It's like, well, they said that in response to what you were doing. And they're like, well, yeah, I'm a fighter. These people are just animals. That's what they want. Like, they want the pressure to ratchet up. They want everyone to feel like this is your last chance. You have to go out and vote. You have to go. Look. That's the whole point. They're trying to froth everyone up. The real plan was always the SCOTUS appeal. Everything else is just trying to measure a reaction. It's simple as that. This is just a trial balloon. You don't have to freak out. You don't have to freak out. That's the rule. You can kind of chill and see what happens. Right, exactly. We see this all the time. Roosevelt, Lincoln, every 10 years, every generation, we see this happen again. And this is a playbook as old as the country is. And I can tell you how I know there was never any chance that New York Times article was real. And I know it for a fact, and I can tell you how I know it for a fact. Look at the reaction on Friday. Look at the reaction when that verdict was released, when that decision was handed down by the Virginia Supreme Court. Where was the protester? You got a video of one single lady walking down the street. She's cursing, she's yelling, she's making a whole scene. Where are the protesters? Was there a mob of protesters outside the Supreme Court building just waiting for the verdict to come out so that they could start shaking things and breaking stuff? No, none of that happened. And if you watch this show a lot, which Esteemed Hams, he does. Maybe he remembers. Like 2 weeks ago, I said they're going to release their decision on a Friday, and they're going to do it so there is no time to mobilize. And it'll be on purpose because you can't organize anybody on that Friday. So then the next Friday, by the time that rolls around, our news cycle moves so fast that people just forget. Like they've already moved on. Or, they see Democrats in the state house doing things so they feel like they don't have to lose their shit yet. That's basically what it comes down to. But, well, dude, how could you do that to your mom? Was she really there? I hope not. Oh, well. But no, so I even said 2 weeks ago that they were going to release the verdict on a Friday. So, that way there wouldn't really be any kind of fervor to do anything. And then now the New York Times, they're getting into the hard work of saying, okay, well, how far can we push this? I mean, can we get riots, or maybe just, we'll do this pack the court thing, or we could do the just do stuff, just ram through the maps anyway. What are they going to do to stop us? They're trying to figure out what their best move is, push where there's mush. I think it was Stalin that said that. Is that right? But all this to say, the story's just, they just wanted to see what happened, what they could make stick, what people are willing to accept. That's all it ever comes down to. But you do see, I mean, in fairness, the walls are kind of closing in right now. They're trying to create a bit of chaos. You might see this. Maybe you got somebody you work with. Or, if you've ever worked sales, there's always one of these, like in a car dealership or whatever, any commission sales place. There's somebody who kind of creates chaos so that everybody all around them is freaking out, trying to figure out how to react or what to do, what the next move is, how to get everything under control. And then there's that one guy who's just chill. He's like, dude, what are you worried about? We're just here. We're just going to do the work. It's going to be tough, but we're going to get it done. And that's the source of the chaos. It's always that guy. It's always him. He looks so cool and collected while everybody else is running around with their hair on fire. And that's the trick. Because to an outside observer, everyone's running all around, and that guy, he's the one who's got it under control. Okay, well, I'm going to talk to him. And that's the Democrats right now in Virginia. You create all this chaos so that Republicans are out here. They're in the streets. They're freaking out. Meanwhile, State House Democrats are like, what are you talking about? No, we would never do something like that. These Republicans, look at these evil, mean things they say on Twitter. Nobody from this administration's ever endorsed this plan. But because of all this chaos, because of the walls closing in, it leads into the biggest story. It's the insider who's about to be looking at the inside of a jail cell. Triple L herself. There are lots of theories about this investigation, right? Motivations. Why is she being investigated now? Well, it is a 3-year-old probe, a 3-year investigation. But in fairness, 3-year investigation, now you pull the trigger on raiding her Senate office. Okay, well, there's a lot of questions. Who? Why? Why is this happening? Did she run afoul of the Democrats? Did she overstep by blocking the Fairfax casino? Maybe the Democrats wanted it. I mean, there's the easy answer, the tempting answer. Oh, this is political retribution from the president. Okay, I mean, I don't think so, but maybe. There is also another good thing to point out. There was $70 million spent on her referendum that did not go through. So maybe National Democrats are looking for a little bit of a refund. You know what I mean? I mean, hey, you got a lot of money going on in that district. You got at least $6 million a year from this Medicaid empire. We just dropped $70 million on a referendum you couldn't get through. And who's to say how that money got spent? What firms were doing the polling, how that advertising was going out, all of that messaging, Maybe now you hang an investigation over her head and you say you don't pull that shit you did in Fairfax ever again. Because at any point, you might get to see what the inside of one of these justice centers looks like. And, honestly, the Kamala campaign itself is bankrupt. But Kamala, I always point this out, Kamala was running with Joe Biden's numbers. I don't know if you remember this, but her EIN, I think, or I can't remember what the word is for a campaign, but she was able to inherit Biden's war chest when she ran all that money, all that deficit. That was on Joe Biden's account. That was Joe Biden's business that she ran into the ground just before the man retired. So while it's true, I mean, she did bankrupt that campaign, but I think it's important to remember there was a whole controversy about her running on someone else's campaign. I don't think it was a DNC deficit. I think that was her campaign that took on that debt. I may be wrong on the details there. It's been a little while since I looked at that. Also, Sam Bankman-Fried, he should be out by the next presidential cycle, I think, right? They're going to let him out just in time to start getting some money back together. But no, so we'll see what happens. Regardless, they'll bail her out. If she wins the primary, which she won't, then they'll bail her out. It'd be crazy if they ran her again. It'd be so crazy if they ran her again. But no, for all of this talk about this little investigation and her Medicaid empire or her cannabis outlet, all of this stuff, when you're trying to discern these theories of who was it that actually triggered the raid finally and what are they actually investigating, there's three things worth remembering when you see a story that's just based on rumor, including this phone call story we started off the day with. The first thing that you have to consider is that these people just completely lack the faculties for planning. They're just not capable of putting out multi-step plans and sticking to them. It's tempting to choose this option for many reasons. Because but the problem is you have to assume it applies to every person in their orbit. Like that there's nobody there who can stop them. That really is kind of hard to believe sometimes. These people have achieved a level of political power that is difficult to achieve. So just believing that they're idiots is kind of tough. The second option is that these people are incredibly capable, that these are master planners, strategists on Sun Tzu level. I mean, they're basically like the top-ranked chess professionals, but for American politics, always thinking 6 steps ahead. And for that to be true, they would have to be a super highly organized, they'd have to be moving like clockwork. The communications would have to be there. You couldn't have your figurehead acting cavalier in any way. They'd have to be prepared for every interview, never saying the wrong things, ever. That's also kind of hard to believe, but a little easier than that everybody's just really that dumb. But no, then the third option, it is admittedly the worst option, is that you're somehow in a mix of both, right? That maybe you have somebody who is an idiot and they were willing to just play the role while other people pulled the strings and helped get them into this political power. And then now, no matter what any staffer says, they have some of these plans and they kind of stick to it a little bit. But then, they just go off the rails. Like in an interview, they just say something that's on the top of mind. Extremely human. That's a perfect way of putting it. Just extremely human. They think they have a plan, but then they start reacting emotionally when backed into a corner. It's possible. But you don't ever want to be accused of option 3 when you're trying to put these things together. Option 3 is tough because the option 3 often is kind of like what you see the main criticism of Trump is, which is that in one second he's a megalomaniac, bumbling idiot, and then in the next second he's single-handedly cornering us into fascism and there's almost nothing we can do and we have to lock our arms and fight. That's ridiculous. So you can't be both. You can't be an idiot and a supervillain at the same time. Or I guess you can, just not in real life. So, it is tough. But no, I think the best way to avoid option 3 is to be very specific when you are analyzing. Not just, when you say it out loud, obviously that's important, but just in your mind when you're trying to figure out what the truth is. You want to be specific. When you just say, "Oh, the Democrats," that's kind of tough. That's a tough sell to anybody who's listening to you, and it's not going to be very informative when you're trying to analyze how the world works. It's better to say, okay, the Abigail Spanberger administration, and you examine specifically her relationship with the L Louise Lucas and her administration, or Virginia Senate Democrats as a whole. See, now you're getting more specific and trying to see how each of these organizations works separately, differently. National Democrats aren't the same thing as the L Louise Lucas administration. So you can see how when you spend $70 million on a product and you don't receive it, you're going to be a little pissed. And sometimes you want to make that salesman pay. And if you have the power to do it, who's to say you don't? Who's to say you don't? So that's why I say when you go with option 3, while it is extremely human, you do want to be specific, right? Now, in other news, Alberta, they passed their petition for independence, right? So now on October 19th, they are going to get to vote on whether or not they get to secede from the Canadian government or at least become a sovereign state separate from those national policies, right? If they gain independence, if they do gain full independence, Canadian pundits have been very quick to say that it's incredibly likely that they will become part of the U.S. They say an 80% likelihood. That's the word they use. 80% likelihood that they'll become part of the U.S. And that last part is what's really suspect to me, right? They don't offer any statistics, no real reasoning other than because they would. They're just saying that to get Albertans to think twice about whether or not they really want to be free. So all these national pundits back in Toronto, back in Ottawa, they're just, oh yeah, they're gonna vote for independence and then become the 51st state. And Albertans are like, yo, what the fuck? No, we don't want to be the 51st state. See, now you plant the seeds of doubt. But really, what Alberta wants is independence. They don't want statehood. Right, exactly. They will become an exclusive autonomous zone, right? Something separate from the Canadian government. Right. And that actually, I'm glad you beat me there. Let them live like the Texas Republic. Give them 10 years, a golden age for Alberta. We're calling for a golden age for the people of Alberta. It'll be beautiful. But no, the reasons that they have for wanting independence preclude the possibility of statehood, right? Because look at what happens with the American. Well, look at what happens, their main grievance, right? Albertans want independence from Canada because they're tired of the migrants that are hurting their wages for their blue-collar people. They are tired of national gender politics, and they don't like the profits from their natural resources getting treated like an ATM by the rest of Canada. And that's basically what the U.S. does to every single state other than Texas. Every state that has those kinds of natural resources. Let's be honest, maybe with the US, then, the terms are more reasonable than the way that they're just getting absolutely pillaged by Canada with all these crazy social programs that they don't even like. And sure, Texas, they enjoy the largesse of their oil profits if you're in Southeast Texas specifically, or Austin. But if you look around the rest of the state, not everywhere is Dallas, if you know what I mean. But look at Louisiana, on balance. How do they do with their natural gas profits? How does West Virginia do on the coal profits? Do you really think that if Alberta became part of the U.S., are they going to get the Texas treatment, or are they going to get the West Virginia treatment? Right? Right now, that becoming a state, it doesn't make things much better. I think it would make things better than the way that they're getting it from Canada. But there is that thing, there is that thing the U.S. government does. Oh, yeah, coal's not really worth shit. So even though we're using your resources to power an entire 5-6 state grid, you guys are just going to live up in the mountains and struggle to get good dental care. Sorry about your luck. Now, on the other hand, just trying to play devil's advocate here, but independence is really hard, right? That's not an easy thing. Statecraft is very difficult. Nation building, that's difficult. You're going to need a military. You require infrastructure. You require social safety nets, diplomacy, food production. Self-funding these things can be difficult. Alberta does decently in the food production category, but they might not necessarily have all of the offices and social services and administrators they need for all of these kinds of programs that they would need. And again, yeah, very good point. They're also totally landlocked. I don't think they even, do they have access to the Great Lakes? I don't think so. I don't know. They might through a river. Like if they might have a river that they can get there. Anyway, sorry, I digress. That's a lot of port. That's a lot of port action onto a lake. So like your only customer is the US, right? Like you're kind of screwed. But in the end, they really wouldn't need to be a state at all. Yeah, there we go. Okay, that's what I thought. But no, so they wouldn't really need to be a state, right? They could easily, I mean, very easily. And Trump's even kind of already, he's suggested it a lot, actually, especially recently, that there was a sort of economic security agreement was being floated around. And I think they were even saying this from the White House, from press briefings, that they would be open to some kind of relationship like that. I think, if I understand correctly, politicians in Alberta, the Alberta Prosperity Project, they asked Trump to back off, and he did it. They asked, hey, dude, like we'll talk about that later, but like you don't need to be bringing up all the specifics yet. And he did. He kind of shut up about it. You haven't heard the guy talk about 51st state for a while because they recognized that inside of Canada, this isn't something it's not tempting to them. It's not the average voter is not going to hear these statements from Trump and be like, that's a great idea. Independence it is. No. But an economic security agreement would be great for them. I mean, if you think about it, they'd be totally free from the EPA. You know, they agree to some disbursements to our strategic reserves, maybe, or, you know, that they'll hit a certain quota and we'll help them with, you know, with exports and logistics, you know, that we'll make sure that there's favorable terms. They'll lock that in with some kind of treaty, right? And then in return, you know, we'll be able to control their oil exports. You know, hey, we don't want you selling to China right now. Hey, EU's off limits for a little bit and don't ask any questions. You know what I mean? So, you know, you get a little more control and they still get the money. They still get their sovereignty, their independence. Who knows? I mean, you call it a win-win. I mean, it seems like a win to me. Does it seem like a win to you? I don't know. I'm not from Alberta. Maybe somebody from up there can let me know. But, and, you know, we'd throw in a few military bases, right? You know, they'd probably pick where they go, at least to some extent. But they'd pick some small town, you throw in a military base, now you get some economic stimulus, you know? You turn it into a small city and, you know, it kind of stimulates things. You can start to move in your administrators that help with some of those social programs. All this to say, sorry, I got a little sidetracked. All of this to say, I think the punditry is intentionally overblowing the odds of statehood for Alberta, specifically to demoralize the Albertans. They have sufficient natural and economic resources that's not going to be an issue for them. And if they have a rocky start, you know, we're always here. But before you say that Europe would step in, you know, that they'd join the EU, you are technically correct that, you know, that on balance, when polled, Albertans they say that they'd be more interested in joining the EU than they would the United States. The only way that statistic actually gets to an over 50% response is when you remove the option for sovereignty, right? That's what I'm saying. Albania of North America or Belgium, just culturally, you're totally different. That's beautiful. That's why I love this guy. He's great. He's right on it. He's right on it. I should be listening to his podcast. But no. So before you say that the EU will step in, it's important to note that you need to remove the option from sovereignty for Albertans to accept this. But you have to ask. Don't laugh, but you do have to ask. Did you even read the Don Roe Doctrine? After the raid in Venezuela, did you read the statements that were referred to as the Don Roe Doctrine? Cuba, they're about to get the Venezuelan treatment right now because of a relationship they had with Russia forever ago. And they're just still buying Russian oil. So we're like, yeah, we're going to go in and do the same thing to them. Hegseth was like, they literally did a whole briefing. They had him, was he down? He was down in Congress. They were asking him questions under oath. Like, is it true that Cuba sucks ass? And he's like, yes, it is. No, I'm kidding. You should watch the video. It was newsworthy in so much as it's informative of what's about to happen. They're asking about Russian submarines that still use Cuba as a port today. Or they talk about, how recently we caught spies that were operating within Cuba or different adversaries around the world that are working with Cuba. So, and their relationship with China. Sorry, I almost missed that very important point. Also their relationship with China. So now, we have this thing, right, where, we're happy to go to Venezuela or Cuba, and specifically to put a stick in the eye of Russia or China. Those are the two, like next to the U.S., those are the other two largest superpowers in the world. So do you really think that the EU is going to stick their neck out like that? Like, do you know what's happening with Europe's oil right now? Because the IEA said 4 weeks ago that they only had 6 weeks of oil left for Europe. So pretty soon, they're probably looking at things like rationing, grounding domestic flights. Things are going to get pretty ugly there. And it's all because of this war in Iran. And maybe you think it's bad, maybe you think it's good. It really doesn't matter. Just remember that these people, they charged us tariffs for decades. And they acted outraged when we suggested that we would do reciprocal tariffs, right? They acted outraged when we said that they should match our spend in a war that was happening in their backyard. When we asked them for help securing the Strait of Hormuz, again, they acted outraged. They said, we didn't start this war. We're not helping. Well, guess what, asshole? There's no more oil because it's all behind the Strait of Hormuz. You're done. This war will continue until Europe is bled completely dry. I guarantee it. Until every domestic flight is canceled, until gas stations are closing, until they bend the knee, because that is what is really going on right now at this point. I'm not saying that's why it started. I'm saying that and honestly, I don't know how anybody could come to a conclusion other than this, because from where I'm sitting, that makes sense. And even if you disagree with me on every single fact, if you think Trump is some crazy megalomaniac, just egotist, whatever, they tried to derail his policy in the first 2 months he stepped into office. So if you think that he's that petty, why wouldn't he do this? Even if you disagree with me, you'd have to agree on this point. I rest my case. Counsel. Anyway, so as promised, I have to circle back to old Triple L Louise Lucas and the Medicaid empire. State at the point again? I don't get it. Wait, what? Oh yeah, my point is that whether you think that Trump is mad because they ruined his policy, or whether you think that it's just good politics, we can bring the EU to heel right now. Whether you think this is good politics. So why would the EU come to Alberta's aid? After all of this, sorry, yeah, you did catch me because I almost moved on too fast. If you think that the EU is going to come across the pond to offer Alberta acceptance into the European Union, I'm going to need some of what you're smoking. Because after what we're bringing this whole collection of nations to their knees right now. When all this is said and done, and this is all just, hey, we're going to bury the hatchet, we're going to move on. You buy some of your oil from us instead of those crazy guys in Iran. How does that sound? Okay, we're good. We have the infrastructure, we have the exports, you're good. You think that they're going to risk all that again? No way. Not a chance. Not a chance. But anyway, back to L Louise Lucas. I was asked in the comments section, we were all asked in the comments section, why do we all get so animated? Why do we all get so animated when we have a story about someone like L Louise Lucas, somebody who in 49 states is basically irrelevant and is certainly not even in Virginia, a lot of people don't know who this woman is, right? So why get so animated about her when there's all these stories about Trump? And this question keeps coming up. It keeps coming up in the comments section of the video. Here's the thing, and I want anybody who's, Hams, I'm sure probably already knows, but if you're watching this video on YouTube or Rumble later, go ahead and look this up, because I don't expect you to trust me. You will have a very hard time finding public records that actually prove, like definitively prove, allegations against Trump. And I'm not talking about a guilty verdict. I'm talking about if you find that guilty verdict, then go into the evidence. Dig into the evidence that was used in that trial and tell me, public record, meaning that you can verify it for yourself. There's no financial disclosure form, no publicly accessible business record, no bad dealings, just a whole lot of anonymous sources. These stories constantly, you hear these Trump stories 5 times a week, every day. It's a new Trump story, and yet it's always like, oh, we heard an anonymous phone call. We got details on an anonymous phone call. Somebody close to the Trump family, somebody close to the White House. What am I supposed to do with that? Like honestly, because off the record statements, they don't do it for me. Accusations are not tantamount to a guilty verdict. It's not the same thing. And that is the biggest difference. If you find yourself questioned about these things, pressed on these things, that's what you need to focus on. And honestly, I think that the video that I put out, I think the only reason it did well is because it's all public record. Because you can if I just said, like, I don't know, this is a bad lady, like, nobody cares. But if you give people actual bullet points, you can look this up. You can look at the violations, at the citations, at the money that she's getting, all of this. You can see every bit of it. And it is blatant. At minimum, it is an ethical violation that should get her removed from office immediately, at a minimum. But if it's true, if she's funding other people's campaigns and, using that funding to get people onto those regulatory bodies for the funding and, regulations around those services, if that's true, then that would be tantamount to bribery. That would be, I'm no lawyer, so I guess I don't know. If that's true, then yeah, then that to me seems like it's a jailable offense. But if you just want to see the substance of the very clear ethical violation, that's on virginia.gov. You can look all this up. The government is reporting it. And this brings me to the thing that is absolutely the most demoralizing part of the whole story. I'm not actually sure if what this woman was doing was illegal. Like I said, it's all being reported on virginia.gov. She is getting over $6 million per year. And there is literally nothing you can do about it. That is worse. That is actually worse. If you caught her with her hand in the cookie jar selling illegal weed or whatever in the state, then that's one thing. That's just bad, right? That's just criminal behavior. We can all agree on that. But she made her scam. It's the Lucas Lodge. There we go. That's the name of the company that was billing Medicaid. So the Lucas Lodge is where the people go, where that's what Medicaid is getting in billing. But then the L Louise Lucas Foundation is an LLC that owns the property that the Lucas Lodge rents to put the patients in. So it basically, she's getting paid twice on every dollar. It's fucking wild. But yeah, sorry, I'm catching up in the comments section. But yeah, the weed company is the Cannabis Outlet. Sorry. Yeah, the Cannabis Outlet. If you want to look at that angle, there may be some other stuff there. Some other folks suggested that she had something to do with all the vape stores everywhere. So, anyway. And back to my main point. The ethical violation's bad. But I honestly, genuinely believe that unless you can prove the bribery, like a politician funding another politician's campaign isn't necessarily illegal. And it would make sense. I mean, if I fund a politician's campaign, it's probably because I agree with them in a lot of ways. So if they happen to get on the same board that I'm the chair of and we happen to vote the same way all the time, unless you have a specific email outlining the quid pro quo, very difficult to prove bribery. But all that said, if this is just tantamount to an ethical violation, then what she's doing is actually legal, which makes it way worse. Because while she's getting $6 million a year of your tax money, they raise your taxes every year. And fundamentally, in a lot of ways, like this is kind of similar to the immigration thing, right? Like 80% of people agree. Like if a dude swims across the river, yes, $6 million per year, totaling $52.7 million since she started the Lucas Lodge. But no, if a guy swims across the river, jumps the fence, and then flees into California or some sanctuary city, 80% of Americans agree that that's bad, right? 80% of people, they say, that's bad, right? But these same institutions come out and they say, well, what about the legal immigrants? What about the legal immigrants? How do you feel about them? And people say, oh yeah, that's fine, I guess. If they came here legally, that's no problem. I feel like this is a regulated thing. They say, oh, okay, great. Yeah, we'll go back. We'll tell all the people about to vote on it that you're fine with the legal immigrants. Most people never make the connection. Like between the asylum claims, the H-1B visas, the student visas, all of this, and then you put a ribbon on it with birthright citizenship. I mean, a lot of it is legal. They made it legal. They made it all legal, and that's worse. Like if you meet a person who, their parents came here and they were born here. They came here when they were 4 or 5 years old. They don't have another country to call home, and then now we've done nothing about this problem for 20 years. And so now this person, they have no country to go home to. That is worse. It's worse because now we're in a situation where we have to talk about some constitutional crisis or another amnesty. And then meanwhile, these people are like emotional blackmail. All this to say, like, if you can just have these people living in like $300,000 home in Portsmouth, a $300,000 4-bedroom home in Portsmouth. She's got 8 of these. And I want to point out that is a shit house. I'm sorry. Like Portsmouth is an expensive city to live in. A $300,000 4-bedroom in Portsmouth is probably not a very well-maintained home. I'm just going to be honest. And if you live in Portsmouth or you own a $300,000 home in Tidewater, Virginia, I mean, no offense to you at all. In fact, I own a home that's worth less than $300,000 in Tidewater, Virginia. And I'm not hosting people with limited mental faculties in their advanced age. That is crazy. So it's kind of worse if you imagine that somebody who's already mentally has a hard time processing things, stuck laying in the bed, hoping that somebody will come and help move them to the bathroom. That is way worse than if she was just scamming Medicare with some fake names. Do you understand? Do you understand that by the time you actually go and you need some of these services, there's nothing left for you. Like when these politicians, when they say, yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Elder abuse. And that's really what honestly, a lot of that goes on anyway. Like I know I have a very close family friend. She's a, what do you call it? A senior care. She manages nursing homes, right? And that's a tough job. She tells me some of these horror stories she hears, when she goes to some place that seeing some of these stories, obviously this is very close to her. And so she'll hear about these things, and that emotionally that affects her because she sees how ugly it is. I used to work in a funeral home. I used to do body collections, and you could tell the difference. Like you go into some places and it's like, it's like what do they call it? The sandals or whatever. Like, you go into other places and it's not like that. You see people just living at home with their own family. And you see how much of a struggle that was to keep somebody of advanced age at home or somebody with dementia at home, how tough that is. And you mean to tell me, I'm sorry, I don't believe that these people were getting the highest quality care. Maybe I don't have it. I have some evidence for that. 9 dead people, for one, for starters, 141 serious injuries for second. So, I just, call me crazy. I just feel like that's a lot, I just feel like that's a lot. And, maybe I should ask her, like I said, she manages these places. I'll ask her, hey, if you only have like 32 people max, like, is that a lot? Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, it just gets worse. It just gets worse all the time. And the worst part is you wake up one day and you realize that you wake up and you realize that by the time you require services like this, if you don't have kids, one day you will, right? Like if you don't have a family of your own that can take care of you when you get old, you are going to need a service like this. And there will be nothing left for you, nothing. Like when you talk about more access to healthcare, when politicians talk about more access to healthcare, what they are talking about is more stuff like the Lucas Lodge. That's what they mean. They mean more Lucas Lodge. They don't mean that you get a place to bring your kid when they're sick. That's not what they mean. When they talk about food stamps, they're not talking about it because they're worried about the single mom with 3 kids trying to just provide dinner and needs decent groceries. No, even if the mom's just buying snacks or whatever, still no. They don't give a shit about her. They got to pay back Walmart and Coca-Cola and the snack lobby for getting them elected. That's the only part that they care about. They don't care at all. You could say we're going to double the food stamp benefit, but you can only spend it on meat and produce. And they would tell you to go fuck yourself, period. Because that's not what it's about to them. They have debts. They have serious debts. Workforce training. That's another big one that I think Dan Scott, is he the House President pro tempore in Virginia? Workforce training. You think they're interested in 18, 19-year-old kids with no other options? No, they don't care about them at all. They want some in and out of jail dude who's like, 30, 40 years old, who in between stints at the local justice center, the local jail, he comes back out to try and get another certification before he gets sent back. Permanent customer. Perfect. You can't actually be developing these people. They might start contributing something. Are you crazy? Even if you do accidentally produce a successful student, I guess you'll just threaten to raise his taxes to infinity. I guess that's another reason not to look for that 18, 19-year-old. You get them too used to working for a living and they'll realize that it sucks getting robbed. And that's the problem, man. Seriously, that is the big problem. Is that by the time they're done making all their little debt payments, by the time they're done raking their own cut, there's nothing left at all. So you better not plan on it being there. I always tell myself when I sit down to write these things, I always tell myself I'm going to end it on a high note. And then I get to the end of kind of what I have prepared and I'm like, I kind of effed that up a little bit. I always steered into the ditch, just real low at the end. I get off script and I just, anyway. Oh, executive leader of Prince William County. Yeah, enlightenment is pain. There we go. I really appreciate that suggestion. I am definitely going to look that up. But no, so anyway, thanks for watching. We are on every platform. We're on Rumble, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, well, now known as X, and of course, obviously, TikTok. TikTok is where the conversation is. This is where the live chat is. But, sometimes people do like to comment. People really like to comment on the YouTube page. There's a little conversation goes on there, too. It's not live, but I do often bring up those comments in shorts. I release those all over the place. You can find me basically anywhere, including Facebook. Tell your friends. Tell your friends about it. just tell them don't go looking for him on Threads or Blue Sky. He really doesn't like them for no explicable reason. No reason I can think of at all. So anyway, I'm always here for you. If you're watching this on YouTube, clearly you're not always here for me. But that's okay. No need to feel bad. You just like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, and I'll tell you what, we'll call it even. We'll call it even. No need to feel bad. Thanks for watching. Good night.